There is a certain beauty to these animals. They're majestic and in full flight and competing against one another.
It's a very exciting experience to watch a horse race.
The sights and the sounds, even the cigar smoke outside, and there's really nothing quite like it.
Suffolk Downs was a real pillar of the community. It brought people from all walks of life together. There was something for everyone. You didn't necessarily have to just be gambling. You could just go and enjoy the spectacle of it.
It had that kind of grit that is really part of the Boston culture. These were tough people doing a tough thing. They never complained.
Like I say, there's different people that come to racetracks compared to anything else. It's a big, happy family down there.
Everybody from the richest people down to people with not much, and everything in between, all aspects of life were here.
I rode with one of the greatest generation of riders ever. The things that I learned here from the riders, the trainers. Every race I ride, I bring Suffolk Downs with me.
Every afternoon somewhere in the United States is repeated the age-old ritual of horse racing. They are flashed across the land to unseen millions.
Suffolk Downs was built when they finally legalized horse racing in Massachusetts, and it was a huge success from day one. It was a place to be seen. It was Major League horse racing at its best.
At the time, it was a state-of-the-art facility. It had a concrete grandstand, the first of its kind. So it was one of the largest racetracks, not just in the country, but in the world at the time. Trains would bring people in from all across the city. All kinds of celebrities would come to the place.
Everybody would tell you that the only two sports that really mattered were baseball and horse racing. The reason why horse racing was so popular is obvious. It was the only thing you could gamble on in the United States of America outside of going to casinos in Las Vegas. You couldn't buy a lottery ticket. You couldn't make a legal sports bet. So if you wanted to gamble, what could you do? Go to the racetrack.
Back in the late 1940s, 4 tracks outdrew the Red Sox, the Bruins, and the Celtics.
The Daily Double was the biggest thing in the day. Everybody wanted to be at the races. When you were a jockey, you were an esteemed person. In other words, they looked up to you then. I was friends with all the hockey players, Bobby Orr, all them fellas, Les Esposito. They all came to the races. I was part of the Yastrzemski era. And they knew me. My name was in the paper every day, just like theirs. So they all knew me, and I knew them.
The Massachusetts Handicap, which is commonly referred to as the Mass Cap, really became the signature race at Suffolk Downs.
A handicap race is a race where the better horses are assigned to carry extra weight to kind of even the playing field.
Massachusetts Handicap was perhaps considered the most important race in New England for decades and decades and decades. It attracted the top horses in the country, the top riders, the top trainers.
George Wolfe, the jockey, he won the very first one on Top Row in 1935, and then just 2 years later, 1937, arguably the most famous Mass Cap, Seabiscuit. He delighted the crowd of about 40,000 and won the race. And he went on to win the Santa Anita Handicap.
Seabiscuit actually ran here 8 times. Many of those races would have been races before he became Seabiscuit.
He was just kind of toiling like many other horses, racing here in New England. And in 1936, he raced here at Suffolk Downs, and his eventual trainer, Tom Smith, saw the horse that day, saw something he liked, and it was from there where they transformed Seabiscuit into a national hero.
How cool is it that Seabiscuit ran here 8 times? How cool is it that he won the Mass Cap? You had Warlaway, who was a Triple Crown winner, win it.
You had the best horse in the country come here. They weren't the local horses, they were horses from out of town, but they brought their own riders with them.
It was a big deal. It really fit in as one of the biggest races in the country.
In the early part of the history of Suffolk Downs in the 1930s, the race meets were much smaller, maybe 30 to 50 days. And over time, the meets extended and there were more racing dates. And so there was the more day-to-day racing. It was, a bit of a grind, but there was great opportunity for the local horsemen and people maybe who are trying to start out in the business in some cases to get the practice in, get the reps in. But also it was a community in New England.
Every time a horse is born, the owner thinks, I just welcomed the new Kentucky Derby winner into the world. The reality is that 99.9% of the horses aren't good enough to run the Kentucky Derby. They have to have a place to go.
Horse racing supports way beyond a racetrack because there are farriers and veterinarians and equine dentists and the feed man and the guy that provides the hay and the shavings and all of these things, they kind of go throughout the state.
A lot of people in Revere felt really tied to Suffolk Downs. Thousands of people worked here throughout decades, and our city's so tight-knit that everyone knew someone who worked here, right? You had a family member who worked here at some point in their life. It was an economic engine for the city for a very long time.
I can't stress enough how important these small tracks are to the health of the industry as a whole. At a small track, you're getting the opportunity for young talent to find a place to grow, both as jockeys, as trainers, and then on the front side as executives, as announcers, as handicappers.
My father was a jockey up here, and being a jockey is all I ever wanted to do, so all I ever heard about was Suffolk Downs and all the other racetracks in New England. I started riding in 1978, but I wasn't quite doing as good as I wanted to or what my father wanted me to do. So he got a hold of me and said, why don't you try going to Boston? I remember when I pulled up here to Suffolk Downs, I'd left New York, and I pulled up in a parking lot, and I just seen the grandstand. I went, oh my God, this place is big. The first horse I rode, Shoot Little Luke, he won, and the rest is basically history in New England. Been the greatest ride of my life being here.
I just felt at home here. It was family, that's why I stood in New England. In my era, if somebody was doing bad, and you knew they had a family, you give them a chance in a race. You know what I mean? You say, hey, don't worry, if you need a chance, just yell, I'll give you a chance. Because we were riding in New England, we looked after one another.
They weren't riding or being trainers to get their pictures on the cover of Sports Illustrated. They were doing it to put groceries on the table. Horse racing can be a cutthroat game, and you didn't have that problem here.
You'd have brutally cold days, brutally windy days. The camaraderie was really wonderful, and people would help you out.
Suffolk Downs, in addition to having hosted some of the most famous thoroughbred horses and along with the jockeys in racing history, has an amazing history when you look specifically in music and the entertainment industry. Go back to August 18th, 1966. The Beatles made their final Boston appearance, one of their final appearances ever in concert here at Suffolk Downs.
Hold your breath. You know what it was? Pay $5.50. You could see the Beatles. $5.50. Just tremendous. You couldn't hear much because there was so much noise, but it was just a momentous event you'll never forget.
Yeah, we used to have concerts here. We had Shanatna and Aerosmith back in the 70s. Then we had the Warped Tour. I mean, we used to have all kinds of concerts here.
It is an ideal venue for that sort of environment. The acoustics are great. There's plenty of place for stage and a band.
When I came here, there was like 20,000 people here on the weekend or during the day. And as time went on, it dwindled.
When you look at the history of legalized gambling in America,
The U.S. public racing means betting.
by and large, you're looking at the 1930s when racetracks start popping up across the country, Suffolk Downs being one, 1935. And then you have the racetracks going strong through the war era, and then into the 1960s, you see the first lottery in New Hampshire. And then other states started following suit. In Massachusetts, it was 1972. So at that time, you start having that bit of competition. As the lotteries grow, the novelty wasn't quite what it was back in the 30s and 40s, and with more entertainment options and the proliferation of radio and television especially. So the day-to-day, you see the attendance coming down.
Bill Veeck was a very famous baseball owner, major league teams, and he took over Suffolk Downs for about 2 or 3 years when they were having problems. He had a tremendous feel for what people want to see. He put on different events.
He was a character. He always had something going. Chariot races, things like that. He was a showman. He wasn't a horseman, he was a showman.
Suffolk Downs itself was at the forefront of women jockeys competing on an even level playing field against men. Denise Boudreau was really one of the pioneers among female jockeys, and she was the first female jockey to win a riding title, doing so in the 1970s at Suffolk Downs. And at that time, about 8 to 10 women were all competing on a regular basis, day-to-day basis at Suffolk Downs, and that trend really continued as you went through the years.
I was leading rider one fall meet here, and I beat all the boys. My friend Denise Boudreau was leading rider also before myself. She was always keeping an eye on me. Yeah, she was kind of like an older sister to me. A lot of the girls, we kind of grew up on the backside together, so we all got along pretty well.
Racing was starting to fade a little bit in those days, and he tried everything to bring it back. It didn't quite work. He was there for 2-3 years, and the ownership just ran out of money. I think to a degree, crooked racing had always been there. But back in the 70s and 80s, where it was just absolutely outrageous. And I attended those hearings And they were scary several years later about these gangsters. I mean, as I say, looking down at a jockey, these huge guys, pounding them on the head if they didn't do what they were told to do and beating them to pieces. This is how bad it was.
I'll never forget, the day me and Ronnie was standing right about here. The bar was right over there. Yeah, right over in this area. And all of a sudden we saw all these people come running towards us from the grandstand. I said, what the hell's going on? And then we heard these gunshots going. We figured out we all ran out into the infield to get out of the building. They were having a little bit of a shootout, I guess, in the clubhouse. 2 guys.
When I heard the stories of my dad riding here, 25,000 fans every day, the biggest crowds. And when I got here in 1979, there was still like 15,000 people here a day at the races. But as the years went, you're seeing like 10,000, then 8,000, and it just slowly went down. But Mascap days were the best. The crowds and the noise, and it was just electric, you know. It was our one day of being in the spotlight again.
The Mascap in the late 80s was not at its, the same level as it was in the Seabiscuit Whirlaway days, but it was, for Suffolk Downs, a huge deal. You don't expect horses from Suffolk Downs to normally be good enough to beat the best horses in the country. Well, Coit was a local horse. He's trained by a guy named Guido Federico. What better name for like a Boston Italian guy than Guido Federico? And he was kind of a low-key guy and just a local character and everything. And then here come all these fancy horses in from out of town. The horse that he faced, among others, was a horse by the name of Broad Brush. He was a very good horse.
Sometimes the stage gets set and horses deliver exactly how you hope they're going to deliver in a race, and it was beyond.
They're into the turn, 7.5 furlongs to go. What quite a short.
If you're a Boston sports fan, I mean, this is it. This is the one race in Suffolk Downs history that you really have to embrace, because it was the local favorite, Wacoit. And this jockey was none other than Chris McCarron, who grew up in Dorchester, became one of the greatest jockeys in the history of the world, in the history of racing.
They're into the stretch for the money.
As the race developed about 1/8 of a mile before the finish, it got down to Wacoit and Broad Brush. It was going to be one of these two. And the whole way in the stretch, you had no idea what's going on. They were fighting back and forth, fighting back and forth.
Broad Brush and Wacoit, look at him come. Ding dong bell to the left. Wacoit and Broad Brush.
Lo and behold, by the slimmest of margins, Wacoit won it. And, this was one for the good guys. This is one for the home team.
When it closed, everybody thought that was the end of Suffolk Downs. But when they come back to life, they changed it. They changed the facility. And the person that opened up the facility was a horseman, too. So he couldn't wait to bring racing back to Massachusetts. So it was back to the good old days, it seemed like. I mean, you didn't have the crowd they used to have, but we came back to life again.
That was a good period for this place, because it had been closed for a while. It was really run down. Kind of had a little bit of a nefarious past with fixed racing. They put a lot of money into it, and they made this concerted effort to bring back the Mascap. And out of that, they got Cigar, and Cigar was a sensation. He was the biggest thing in horse racing.
And it's Cigar, Jerry Bailey shakes the reins. Cigar moves away from poor but honest.
He put together a win streak that for a long time was unparalleled, 16 race win streak. And one of his stops along the way, his tour of greatness, was the East Boston Oval.
Cigar turns the mascap into a Boston massacre.
He won the mascap. Fans just packed the house to see him. Then he came back and did it again the next year.
Cigar putting on a spectacular show. 15 for 15. Citations record is next.
You know, I remember the second year that they brought him up when he crossed over from the Connecticut-Massachusetts border after shipping up from New York and Belmont Park. He had a police escort to the track. I mean, how cool is that? A horse getting a police escort to come race at Suffolk Downs.
There were always some major non-horse racing events at Suffolk Downs. The most memorable was always the hot dog safari.
The hot dog safari was a very unique event, combining Americans' love for devouring hot dogs with a day of horse racing. What better way to spend a Sunday afternoon? It was a fundraiser for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, a cause championed by one of the owners of Suffolk Downs, Joseph O'Donnell, who had a son who died of CF. Thousands of people would come. It was a festive atmosphere.
We couldn't wait for the hot dog safari because it was like you had the crowd again, the 20,000 people. You know, you go upstairs and you get sneak some hot dogs and bring them back down to the jocks room.
And then that branched off to a whole another genre of entertainment with Cirque du Soleil shows being held, which was another good way to kind of infuse some life into the place and bring people out to the track.
Don't kid yourself. If there was no betting on horse racing, nobody would have ever cared about it. Or very few people would have cared about it. So it was primarily a vehicle for betting.
The good days, the good years were past tense. And no matter how much you promoted or anything else, they just didn't want it. It's just changing consumer tastes.
If it wasn't for the casinos, there'd be no racing anywhere. They support racing. All the big purses are now from casino money.
The plan had been to turn Suffolk Downs into a full resort-style casino with horse racing as a beautiful centerpiece. And sometimes things are just not meant to be.
It was ultimately decided by the state's gaming commission, and the gaming commission opted to award the license to another applicant.
It all seemed like it was crashing down very quickly. We were so close, and it was all right in front of us what it could have been.
Being here and watching it slowly die, it hurt. And in 2014, I couldn't ride here the last week because I didn't think it was ever going to open up again, and I had to leave. You know, because I would cry every night. You know, I would cry because I didn't want to leave. You know, and I'm starting to get emotional now. I didn't want to leave. You know, this was my life.
For the next couple of years, we continued to have boutique racing weekends, which were a couple of weekends each year, which helped the local horsemen and women continue to stay afloat financially.
Seeing everybody was wonderful. You'd see all your old friends, and you'd forget that it was all gone.
And then in 2019, it was really the end. The second to last day, skies opened up, it poured, and I love some bad weather at the racetrack. To me, that always, you feel like anything can happen, and anything did. The racetrack got struck by lightning, which was, to me, the racing gods' way of saying that they weren't happy about this either. And then the last day happened in 2019, and it felt sad, but like a celebration. And we all went out with our heads as high as we could.
I'm sort of one of the nerds who walk around downtown Boston and read every sign. If you stand, for example, at Faneuil Hall Marketplace, there's a really interesting marker of where the shoreline was in 1630 when European people first came here. My son lives in Brooklyn, and there's a marker for Ebbets Field where the Dodgers played. I just had to touch that spot. I'm fascinated by that kind of thing, and I suspect that there will be a lot of people in the future who will be fascinated by exactly where the track laid out here and where the clubhouse was. We do care deeply about what the history of this track has been, marking it, remembering it, being proud about it, but also looking to the future is what we're all hoping to do.
I got elected in 2016, and the city was very much suffering from a post-casino hangover and not really sure what we were going to do kind of moving forward. And one of the things that we impressed upon the HYM team, and the HYM team completely bought into, was the idea of public process and transparency and as much communication as possible. Well, I think a lot of people they don't want history to be erased. And it was personal for a lot of people because this is where they came to maybe unwind. This is where they came to work. This is where they met their wife. It's understood that we can't just erase what's happened here, and that the rich history of Suffolk Downs will be incorporated into the future transformation.
There's a pond in the middle of the infield, which is in the shape of a horse's hoof. We'll keep that pond. In the central open space, there'll be a track that will loop around. That's a 1-mile loop for people to make a walk or make a run. And aspects of that track will be on the footprint of where the original horse racing track has been. There's nothing like this in the United States. To find a site that is 161 acres, located not just on one MBTA train station, but on 2, in 10 minutes here in downtown Boston, and close to, an international airport, plus the ocean and the beach. And now we're in the process of building out a community where about 15,000 people will live, and probably about 25,000 people will come to work every day.
The place that we've landed is really transformational. If we think about the ability to meet so many of the moments that we have around climate, around housing, there's just so much opportunity and so much incredible work that's happening here to make this place an economic engine for the region.
One of the things we wanted to do immediately was to open the site up. People can come here every day and walk their dog, go for a run, use the track. And then we have different events. For example, there's the Daffodil Dash. So in the wake of the marathon bombing, there's a group of kids who run a dash, plus music, plus other pieces. In Suffolk Downs, nobody's being displaced. There's nobody who lives here. In fact, the opportunity here is to create housing for people. That's why we've made such an emphasis on building as much housing as possible. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, nobody's built 10,000 units of housing on any single project, ever. 20% of our units will be affordable. Again, nobody's ever created this much affordable housing on any site previously in Massachusetts. It's a huge responsibility for us, something that we take very seriously, and really important that we, deliver on it. Hopefully I'll come here and walk around and bring my kids and someday some grandkids and be proud of what we've created.
Some of the nicest moments I've had here, part of my life, part of most of my life. And to see it go under, like Lincoln Downs, Narragansett Park, Rockingham. I lived through the whole 4 tracks, and they're all gone.
I feel it's a wonderful sport. And I did this for a job for years and years, and I miss that. I miss the people that were in it.
The idea of horse racing is starting to look a little antiquated to some people, and with headlines of drug abuse and disqualifications and animals dying, I do understand that the public perception is not very good right now.
We're sitting at an empty racetrack in one of the most important cities in the country, and it's not economically viable to be a horse racetrack anymore.
One thing that is really true of cities for literally thousands and thousands of years is cities evolve and cities change. Horse racing was important on this track. Gathering for music and entertainment was important on this track during the period of time. But as we progressed into this period of time in 2023, people need to remember that this track, as it stands here today, is an abandoned horse racing track.
It is a surreal thing to me to think that someone's going to go about their life on the same track that Seabiscuit ran on, or where Cigar ran.
I rode my first race here and trained here, and all my friends were here all through the years. We grew up together here, yeah. So it is special.
There are memories that you'll never be able to take away. I had my son in the winner's circle here when he was 3 days old. Winning over 1,600 races here alone is a milestone. That's more than a lot of people have done in their whole career, and I got to do it at my favorite racetrack of all time. It's just something about Suffolk Downs that it's implemented in your heart and in your mind. And you might leave Suffolk, but Suffolk will never leave you.